Hi everyone, I'm Danielle Byington, and in this video, which will be one of a few where I'm discussing Homer's Iliad, we're going to be talking about some of the background information, some of the side stories, the Greek mythology that leads us up to the situation of the Trojan War itself, where we are in those last few weeks of the Trojan War, where where Homer's Iliad begins. And this is going to be the story of the judgment of Paris. Now, to get to the judgment of Paris, we first have to learn about the story of Leda and the Swan. Now, if you know anything about Zeus from Greek mythology, besides that he is sort of the head of the gods, the king of all the other gods and goddesses, he sleeps around quite a bit. And on a more serious note, these are generally rape narratives. His situation with Leda, as it usually goes, he falls in well, he doesn't really fall in love. He becomes enamored with a mortal woman. And to get closer to the mortal woman, he disguises himself in some way. Many of the stories involve him disguising himself as an animal so he can discreetly get closer to the mortal woman and then have his way with her. That is how he does this with Leda. So, in the story of Leda and the swan, Zeus disguises himself as a swan, then he has his way with Leda, and she gives birth to two children. She has two golden eggs. She gives birth to two golden eggs, right? Because Zeus was in the form of a swan. So that's the only reason this makes sense. From one of those two eggs, we will get Helen of Troy. Now, before she is Helen of Troy, she is first Helen of Sparta. She is the wife of King Menelaus, the king of Sparta, who is one of your characters featured in the Iliad. So the reason she becomes Helen of Troy is because of the judgment of Paris. So first, we are at a wedding. The wedding is that of the parents of Achilles, Thetis and Peleus. So we have the wedding of an immortal, a sea nymph, and a mortal, King Peleus. So at this wedding, since it's an immortal and a mortal, not only have many important mortals, those knowing King Peleus, been invited, but since Thetis is there, basically all the gods and goddesses are there, except one who was not invited. That is the goddess of discord, the goddess of strife, Eris. So to complicate things, as that's what you would do if your job was to be the goddess of discord, she throws a golden apple on the ground. And as I have said before, like many mythology stories, there are subtle variations to this situation. She throws a golden apple on the ground that is labeled "to the fairest of all," or "to the fairest goddess of all." Three goddesses fight over this golden apple, who it's intended to be for. And that would be Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena. Hera is Zeus's wife, the queen, right? So while they are throwing punches over this golden apple, they come to Zeus and say, well, you decide who does it go to. Since Hera is involved, Zeus really doesn't want to make a decision because he is frequently in the doghouse for all his other antics, like the whole Leda and the Swan thing, for example. And so he passes the task off to Paris. And Paris is a prince of Troy, the city of Troy, the city that all this Trojan War stuff is about, right? And he's considered a very handsome young man, but he's also quite stupid and lame. And he he is a little nervous too about making a decision. So the goddesses each offer a bribe to him. Sorry, we're going to this slide. So we need each one, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, to offer Paris something that seems worth his while, and making two other goddesses quite angry at him for probably the rest of his life. So first, Hera is going to offer him to be the king of all of Europe and Asia. Then Athena will offer to him a military prowess, like he will never be defeated in battle. And then Aphrodite, and as we have already discussed in the previous video, in Sappho's Ode to Aphrodite, Aphrodite is the goddess of beauty and love, but it's not unconditional love or marriage love, it is carnal love, so sex and beauty. Aphrodite offers to Paris the most beautiful woman in the world. He will get to sleep with her every night. And so stupidly, he takes Aphrodite's offer. Whereas if you look at the other two offers, he probably could have gotten Aphrodite's offer without her help if he had chosen the military prowess, which could have allowed him to become king of a lot of lands, maybe not all of Europe and Asia, but he stupidly chooses Aphrodite's offer. And that most beautiful woman in the world is Helen. She was Helen of Sparta. So there's the first problem. She's being offered without her consent, and she's already married to someone else, King Menelaus. So now she's going to become Helen of Troy. There are different variations of how she ends up in Troy. So the most popular, the most common is that we say she was taken without her consent, somehow kidnapped. If you've seen the 2000s film adaptation of most of the Iliad's content called Troy, where Brad Pitt plays Achilles, there aren't really supernatural elements at all in that movie. You have just the consequences of human action. And so in that, Helen is taken away with Paris. Like the Trojans are dealing with the Greeks, dealing with some bureaucratic matters, and Paris sees Helen and thinks, well, I'm just going to bring her with me. And that's where all the trouble begins. In some versions, she falls in love with Paris because Aphrodite does that. She could make Helen fall in love with Paris again against her will. And so she would willingly go with him to Troy. In other variations where it's a more supernatural element, Aphrodite just at the snap of a finger teleports Helen to Paris's bedchambers, and there she is. So that is how we end up having the Trojan War. Menelaus is not particularly happy that the Trojans have taken his wife Helen, and so he gathers up all these other tribes in Greece. Now, I know it's a little confusing when you're reading the Iliad, and they are not always referred to as Greeks. I'm going to this map here. You have different areas where everyone is from. So you have Spartans, and a lot of these other areas you see noted at some point in the Iliad. They're all Greeks. They're just different tribes who are all going for the cause of not being disgraced by King Menelaus having his wife abducted by the Trojans. So we're going to go from here to over here, where we assume Troy would have been if there really was a city of Troy, and have 10 years of war to get Helen back. And that is all for the Judgment of Paris. Please be sure to watch the other videos describing other background content to help you understand the books I cover from the Iliad better.